you want to differentiate also your competitors between direct or indirect. Maybe they're also in different colors. And how I usually do this is kind of cool. I actually have the logo of the startup, and then these different competitors, I just have like 1, 2, 3, and I color code them different colors. So literally as an investor, I can look at your slide, see your logo, where you're at. I can see what differentiation variable you have on the x-axis, and then I can see what your variable is on the y-axis, and then I can quickly determine where you're at. And then of course you name these competitors. And then you can combine it. You can combine the direct competitors, okay, versus indirect, or you can develop another one. Like for instance, on one of the presentations, what I've done is I've actually had a couple of these. So on one of the presentations, okay, I'll take this out now because you've seen it. I actually had another one, quadrants, okay? And now of course I put myself in here again, and then my variable, my key differentiator, okay, variables on the x side, okay, and the y side, of course we're designed in such a way where once again goes from negative to positive, and you know, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, so it looks very visual. Now if you have, let's say, 2, 3, 4 different differentiation vectors, then you may want to develop these different graphs differently. And so what would happen is then you may have to have another slide. So you have, for instance, this is called really a competitive matrix, okay? And then the next slide may have to be where you talk about the barriers to entry as an example, and you really go into detailed perspective of it. Now, you know, then you got to really think through all this stuff. So I think that from an investor perspective, because I've looked at, like I said, more than 5,000 presentations, is that where entrepreneurs fail, in my opinion, one of the large slides for their failure is they don't really go into the detail of how they're different than competition, because competition is good. And so I think sometimes they try to overlook it. I don't know, sometimes they don't want to admit that they're competing with somebody else. But you know what? If you watch the How to Build a $1 Billion Startup Almost Overnight, it's actually beneficial from an investor perspective that there is competition within your sector, because then I know that I'm not going to be the one building the sector alone, nor am I going to be the one as an investor trying to educate the market what you're trying to do. So competition to a certain extent is good, and if you looked at those videos, you will also know that if in the growth curve or a bell curve in the emerging market, if you're before the critical phase transition of going from an emergent to a hyper growth market, then I don't care if you've got a few competitors, as long as you're able to differentiate, and as long as you're able to prove to me that the customers in the early phases of the market evolution are, you know, if they're one set of customers, that your differentiation value proposition is actually going to expand into the growth cycle of the market. And so from that perspective, the competitive slides are very critical in you explaining to the investor the differentials of what you're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, Me Too products are very difficult to go through into the market. So if you want to get money from an investor, you got to actually make him understand why you're different and why the greatest, latest thing. And also when you're different, you also have to prove that your differentiation vectors, whatever they are actually the vectors that the customer, your market, wants, and they put a priority to it. So for instance, so if the customer wants speed, but you're saying that you're offering cost advantage, but the customer, this particular segment, of course they're going to want cost advantage, but actually is more interested in the speed differential, then you're pitching the wrong pitch. And so from that perspective, you've got to think about what your differentiation points are. And then you have to be able to communicate it to me or to the VC why you're different and how you're different, why those vectors are different. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the marketing overview slide. And I think if I can tell you anything about this slide is you want to get the investor excited about the market opportunity. So let's go through it together on some of the things that I actually like to have in the market overview slide. Obviously, we're going through the standardization again of the template. And so the first thing you want to do, project to the investor, or actually anybody, is that the market size is huge. The bigger the market size, it's, to some extent, I mean, usually you want to show the investor that the market you're attacking or approaching is huge, but by the same token, it's all relative. So you have to look at subcategories of each market and the overall market category. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have a market size in terms of units and also dollars or euros, whatever currency. So, and one of the things you want to do is, and this is usually what I do, is I develop a couple of really cool looking charts. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two, but I usually use, just so you know, the technique I use is Microsoft Excel, so I'll do the chart and then I'll convert it into a graphic. Usually I like to have bar charts because visually, when you have a bar chart, it's very easy for the investor to see, and of course you want to label it really well. And one of the things that I do is when I do it in Excel, I export it as a PNG graphic, which makes it much easier for me to put it into either a Microsoft PowerPoint presentation or, in my preference, Adobe Illustrator. And that's a small little secret. The reason I do it is because one of the things that I see a lot from an investor perspective is when the entrepreneurs show me their graphs and charts is they don't look really good because there's always some disconnect in the transfer from Excel to a PowerPoint, and also by doing it this way you have a lot more options to make it fancier. One of the things that I do in Illustrator is that if I want to bring out a key point in the graph, I'll actually circle it. I'll use a free drawing tool and I'll just circle it and I'll write some point into it to bring out the main emphasis of the slide. So your marketing overview, of course, you always want to have size and dollar amounts. Okay, and then the other thing you want to talk about is you want to explain the market patterns that are playing out that favor your startup. So if there's changing in demographics, or there's changing in a specific subcategory, or actually there's a market where you're riding on top of a market. Just as an example, in How to Build a $1 Billion Startup Almost Overnight, I talk about Chipotle creating a fast casual dining sector subcategory on top of the fast food category. So I show you that chart. You can check it out. So you want to be able to talk about the opportunity, and then of course you want to talk about how your startup fits within that opportunity, okay? And how you best to do it is, in fact I've done it on some of the other videos, is that you want to also explain where you are in the market cycle of your category. So for instance, first thing you want to show is explain whether you're going into an emerging market or you're going into a market that's already well established and you're creating a subcategory, as an example. So if you have a market going like that, okay, and it hasn't hit a critical point, then you're somewhere playing in here, okay? So if you can quickly explain to the investor, whatever market this is, the same principles apply, is where you fit in the overall cycle of the market, then it gives the investor a very good feel of what you're trying to do as well, okay? So from that perspective, that's very important. One of the other things that you want to also consider from a market size perspective is the geographical aspect of it. So for instance, are you going to be playing in the global market, or are you going to be playing in the local or regional markets? And that's very important. Of course, if you're a startup in Silicon Valley and you're doing high tech, you're always going to start locally, but then with the full intent of expanding globally as quick as you can. If you're opening up a new chain of restaurants, that, for instance, competes against Chipotle, then you're going to most likely roll it out regionally and then try to saturate that market as much as you can, perfect your logistics operations and scaling from one store to 50 as an example. Whether you're doing it internally or you're doing it through a franchise model, it's all relative. You still have to figure out how to scale. So you have to also explain to the investor in this market overview how you're going to roll out your products and your startup into the marketplace, and in what launch sequence whether you're going to start local, grow it slowly, or were you going to start local and just expand and go digital globally overnight? So those are some of the things you want to look at. I have a big pet peeve about this, is that when you're doing this marketing overview slide, you want to make this very exciting, okay? And if you're doing graphs, like one slide is graphs, or you're doing a bar chart, okay, make them colorful, make it stand out, make it look sexy, okay, make it also look easy for the investor to see what you're trying to prove with your data points. Because at the end of the day, if you're going the VC route, okay, you have to prove to most of the venture capitalists that you're going into a big market, because they have to justify putting $10 million into your startup, for example. If you're going after angel investors, then you have to think about how you want to position it, because for instance, if you're trying to launch a new restaurant as an example, then the size is going to be much different, and it's most likely going to be local in the beginning. So you have to be very careful of thinking through, as you're doing this market overview slide, what type of investor you're presenting to, because to some extent it's going to change. If you're also, it depends on the category too. If you're dealing with high tech, then you're talking about the dynamics of global markets eventually, and you're gonna want to nail it. When I say nail it, you're going to want to nail the concept first, and then you're going to have to scale it really quickly, okay? The cool thing about it is that, and I was one of the things that I was listening to in Bloomberg is one of the VCs actually used a great phrase. His mentality was, and they were actually applying it to B2B type of solutions, which was, today, just like the consumer markets, the cost of development of a solution is substantially lower. They figured out that it takes about $1.5 million today to develop an enterprise software application. And then once it's developed, which used to take $10-20 million, but once it's developed, then you can just scale it. So he called it nail it and scale it. And that's really what you also have to look at as well when you're looking at this market overview slide. One of the other things that you may want to do, and also I want to tell you that the market overview slide, on the average, is most likely 2 slides, okay? Now, you could compact everything into one, but you gotta make, if you were gonna do that, make it tight, make it visual, and don't make it too cluttered. So I really do believe that, if you got too much stuff, junk on your slide, then you're just going to lose the investor, because from a visual perspective, because you got to remember, you're still presenting, you're pitching for money. From a visual perspective, you want to make the flow of information go very smoothly and easily from a visual perspective. So this may be 2 slides. And then the other thing you want to do is you want to also kind of, on the market overview, look at the value chain, okay? So for instance, if I'm an investor and I'm trying to figure out what you're trying to do, because remember, we're getting pitched all day long by, zillion startups, and that's no exaggeration, and I have the value chain, so you got like innovation, and then it goes to manufacturing, and then of course it goes to, and this is simplified, okay, goes to distribution, and then eventually goes to like solutions for the market. You also want to explain to the investor where you fit in. So if you're an innovation company and you're only doing innovation and you're outsourcing the manufacturing, you want to explain that. If you're going to innovate, create really cool products, let's say you're a hardware startup, okay, and you're going to innovate, design cool products, like for instance Apple, but you're going to outsource this, okay, then you're going to keep it that way. But in some instances, for instance, some manufacturers prefer to innovate and manufacture themselves. So a perfect example of it is the automobile industry. Toyota, for instance, they innovate, they design, they manufacture products, and then what you can do is show where you play in that value chain. So you may end up being a vertical producer where you're trying to address the entire value chain yourself. Once again, it's very helpful to an investor if you explain to them where your startup fits in, not only from a market size and market opportunity perspective, but how it plays out into the market value chain of a specific industry. So from that perspective, your marketing overview slide is pretty much, think of it as a slide that gets the investor excited that you're going into a very, very cool sector, and you have all the tools and the vision and the management team and the story and all that ready to go in terms of attacking a market.